Inclusive Education at the University of Washington, we are thrilled to be partnering with OSPI and some exemplary schools, one of which is here to share their journey with you today. Here with us today from the Herring Center for Inclusive Education are inclusion specialists Christina, Naomi, and Rena Marie. My name is Cassie Martin. I'm an inclusion specialist and demonstration site lead at the UW Herring Center, and I'll be walking us through the webinar today. Our project coordinator, Molly Lyman, is also here in case you experience any technological issues. As we get started, please test your audio at the bottom left-hand corner of the menu. Before we dive in, let's make sure we have everything ready to get started. Thank you for sharing comments and ideas in the chat. Because of the number of people participating today, we won't be answering questions or responding via the chat. If you'd like our presenters to answer a question, please use the Q&A feature instead. We'll be recording today's webinar and it will be provided on the Herring Center's demonstration sites webpage. The recording from today will be available by the end of this week. As we go through the webinar, please keep this webinar etiquette in mind. We encourage a growth mindset where you are open to thinking about new ideas and willing to push yourself to grow. Thank you for joining us today, for being present, positive, and engaged. So let's take a minute and practice in the chat. Please take a second to share what impact you hope today's webinar will have on your school's inclusionary practices. We'll be able to reference this information later, and it will be useful for us in future planning. So let's take a minute, get familiar with the chat, and write down some of your ideas. If someone says we need a place to start that's not overwhelming, we're hoping for specific examples of how inclusion looks in class, as well as how it's represented on IEPs. We're very early in this process. I want general education teachers to feel like they can ask for help without feeling like they're not doing enough. Thanks for the feedback. Keep it coming on the chat because we'll be referencing it to make sure that we address some of those needs that you have today. So to start, here's a little background information about the Demonstration Sites project. In the fall of 2019, OSPI launched the Inclusionary Practices Professional Development Project. The Herring Center partnered with OSPI to coordinate and lead this part of the larger statewide project, creating model demonstration sites that highlight inclusionary practices across Washington state. The Demonstration Sites project was developed to provide educators from around the state with the opportunity to observe inclusionary practices in action, meet with school teams, collect artifacts that aid in systems change, and learn about how to implement inclusionary practices in different school contexts. Our demonstration sites highlight the diversity in our state. They include urban schools, rural schools, and schools in some of our largest and smallest districts across Washington. In collaboration with Herring Center inclusion specialists, the original intention and future intention of this project was for demonstration sites to host visiting schools to showcase high leverage inclusionary practices. By sharing these practices and opening their doors to teachers, administrators, families, and community members, it allows visitors to see best practices in action and apply them in their schools. At the same time, the demonstration sites themselves continue to grow their inclusive cultures and refine their practices that contribute to equitable learning for all students. Clearly right now, we have some constraints around literally opening our doors, but have been doing our best to pivot to continue to provide transformational learning using virtual platforms. And this is how you will hear about Clovis Point's inclusive education journey. So there's some founding principles that drive our demonstration sites work. To start, in every school, there are things that are working well. In education, we have the tendency to examine the problems associated with our practices instead of examining what's working well, why it's working well, and how we can use that information to make things better. This asset-based approach is a productive way for schools to leverage their strengths to become more inclusive. Also, inclusion is not a special education initiative, but is a cultural shift in philosophy and practice. If we simply change the way we deliver special education services without considering the culture of the school or how all students engage in teaching and learning, we will never make the changes we need to truly impact student learning. Through the course of our webinars and by way of scheduling virtual visits, districts, schools, and communities can learn more about what steps are taken to make these shifts to a more inclusive school. This includes learning about instructional strategies, systems, and structures that allow for more inclusive learning communities. The impetus for why schools began making these changes in the first place, and how they engage stakeholders, the district, and other strategic moves they've made along the way to facilitate lasting and sustainable change. Clovis Point will share much of that with you today. What's exciting about demonstration sites is they're at various stages of their journey. And whether they're in year 1 of their journey or 6 years in, they all have plans for continuous improvement. They recognize that as new students enter their buildings or join virtually, and as they collect more information about the best ways students learn, that their professional practices need to reflect that learning in responsive and meaningful ways. We developed this project because we experienced the impact on visiting schools when they saw inclusionary practices in action, the feelings, the dynamics. It was just such an effective way for visiting schools to get why this was working so well. And we experienced the impact on our demonstration sites by hosting visiting schools. Going virtual, just like for districts across the state, has encouraged us to develop new innovations, make some mistakes and learn, and to engage in true reflective practice as we are adapting and growing in response to what we've learned. And these experiences inform us as we move forward. But for today, in just a minute, we're very happy to hand it over to the team at Clovis Point Intermediate School in Eastmont School District in East Wenatchee, Washington. So first, let's start with some polling to see who's joining us today. Looks like we have some administrators here today, some teachers here today, specialists here today, folks from the ESD here today. We're so happy that you're all here joining us to learn more about Clovis Point's journey to become a more inclusive school. At this point, I'm going to hand it over to Dustin and to their principal, Amy Dory, who's going to introduce her school team.
Hi, I'm Amy Dory. I'm the principal here at Clovis Intermediate School, and I'll introduce my team to you today. We have Carrie Stewart. She's our 5th grade inclusion specialist. We have Rebecca Bush. She's our 6th grade teacher. Renelle Davis. She's intervention. We have Matt Davis. He is our school psychologist. Amy Johnson, who's a 5th grade gen ed teacher, of course. Dustin Johnson. He's our 6th grade inclusion specialist for math. We have Kesley Grody, who teaches 7th grade, Christy Barnes, who teaches 5th grade, and last but not least, we have Brandy White, and she is our 7th grade inclusion specialist with the concentration in ELA. And I forgot to say Dustin concentrates in math. All right, Amy, take it over.
Okay, well, welcome. We're super excited to be here, and I'm so glad that you are here too. We, as you might have seen, are in East Wenatchee, Washington. In case you're not sure, we're just east of the Cascades. So we are lucky enough to have the Columbia River here and beautiful scenery. Our main agriculture and industry would be fruit, growth of fruit and storage, warehouses, fruit packing, and all that type of thing. To give a little snapshot of our population, we have approximately 14% migrant students who qualify in the migrant category, approximately 15% English language learners, maybe around 68% low-income students, and students with disabilities are around 12% in our building. We have around 700 students in our building this year. Currently, we are a grades 5-7 intermediate school and have been since we were built 14, 15 years ago. And but we are actually scheduled next year to become K6. So we have lots of change coming up for us in the future here. So I think we can go to the next slide. Yeah, so this is just a tiny little snapshot of some activities that you might see around here at Clovis Point. We are super proud of the fact that our teachers and teams look for opportunities for kids to enrich the learning that we're doing. And you can kind of see that in some of these images. One cool thing is we have in all these photos, kids with students with IEPs and students without, but it's not something that you would notice just looking at the pictures. Everybody is engaged in the activities, and all students get to participate regardless of whether they may have a disability or not. We look for ways to include all the kids in those activities, even when it's particularly difficult. And I want to share about that. We are fortunate enough to have community partners such as our North Central Regional Library, or programs called Kids in the Forest, or various conservation organizations that have education and outreach. And one example that was pretty cool is the snowshoeing, if you can see that on the screen. The library actually has acquired snowshoes enough that we can take the whole 5th grade snowshoeing. And so last year, you might see there, we were able to go snowshoeing. But what was so cool was we had a student in the 5th grade last year whose disability required the use of a wheelchair. And it was really neat how people such as the paras, the teachers, the environmental education teachers who were leading the activity, and the parents, all teamed together to find a way for that student to participate and still be able to be a part of the activity where snowshoeing wasn't actually a choice for him. But they had decided to have him use a sled, and he was able to participate and learn all the snow science activities that were planned for the groups. And he had peers who were eager to join his group, and he got to, get all that same teaching and experience in the snow and fun that everyone did, even though it was just a little bit different for him. So that was something that we were really proud of. Let's see. I think I covered it all. Yeah, and I think it's going to be Matt Davis now.
And so that's what I really appreciate about the team that we currently have at Clovis, is it's just kind of become second nature, and that we don't even have to think about it to include any kids. When I started the journey, it was much more of me being the cheerleader, planting seeds, kind of the Jiminy Cricket of, hey, remember, we've got to think about this student, or we need to look at this to include them. And we're now getting to the point where, teachers are just assuming that this is stuff that we're doing, and they're doing it on their own. When we first started at Clovis, we were much more of a traditional segregation model with a lot of resource room pullout, the education being much more siloed, not a lot of communication between what the special ed teachers were doing and what the general ed teachers were doing with the kids. And we did have some level of integration, but I like this graphic because even within that, it was the same with us. Those students were still somewhat siloed within that regular ed classroom, and would even maybe be pulled out of that regular ed room at times. So it truly wasn't an inclusion model. It was much more based on, are the students at a point academic skill wise that they can come in and do what the typical kids are doing, more so than how do we look at their strengths, what can they what can we do for accommodations and modifications to get them exposure to that core curriculum that they were missing. And I think in fairness to the initial teams at the building, I think the thought process at that time was pulling them out for that small group, individual one-on-one small group instruction was helpful, but there's negatives and drawbacks to that, which I think the team's going to talk about as we go along here. And so I think if we go to the next slide, we can talk about kind of how we're proceeding through our journey into the inclusion process. So as we came out of more of the resource room model, somewhat of an integrated model, we started trying a few things. We tried grouping the kids together, general ed and kids on IEP, that maybe were similar skill levels, but we found that again, that was more of a, kind of a leveled system. The kids still weren't getting the exposure to the core curriculum that they should have and could have been getting if they were truly included in the classroom. So from that, we moved on to more of a co-taught model where we had a special ed teacher assigned to each hallway, each grade level, and they would push into those classes and work within the general ed classroom to support those students that had learning needs or were on an IEP. And I think the hope from that was we could start to build capacity out to the rest of the teams in the hallway, with each special ed teacher kind of handling each grade level. And now that we're kind of into this new situation of the distance learning and having to put our kids into cohorts, what we've done actually is we've assigned an equal amount of students on IEP to each teacher in the building. And so from the ground up, they're all included in all of our classes. And that's a big changeover from where, like I said, we started as a building where those students were really kind of only going in when the schedule dictated it, or maybe only going in for, you know, the PE and the arts, or possibly even science and history. Now they're, you know, included as much as possible into those core ELA and math classes. And I think that kind of covers where we're at now for our kind of current situation.
So I'm Amy, I'm the principal, and I'm new to this team actually. I need to give a big shout out. This will be my 5th month here at Clovis. But Erin Coyle, who was the vice principal here before me, really started this journey. She's the one who worked with Cassie. She's the one who wrote the grant, and she's the one who really started some of these tough conversations. And as we're looking at why move to inclusionary practices, and we did make a big change this year where all teachers have IEP students. And we really moved, you'll see, and they're going to dig into a lot more of this, but really from the co-teaching model to the inclusion specialist model. So there's a couple of reasons why, and they're going to dive, like I said, much more into these, but a need for grade recognition. Our kiddos and IEPs were not making the honor roll. They weren't getting that recognition that their age-like peers were getting. They needed, and then they found, okay, if we put kiddos in, they need assistive technology. We know kids deserve, and their right as students is to access grade level content, no matter where they're at in their IEP journey. And I think that's really important. Those are conversations we're having every single day with staff. This team's amazing. I'm talking to staff. Kids can do it. Kids want to be able to discuss, and they want to be able to have that opportunity to learn what every single other person is learning. And with this assistive technology, they're going to dive in, like I said, but kids can do it. They can have those important conversations. We also talk about the need for equal access to education and content, like I just said. I also think of this assistive technology almost like a pair of glasses. You know, if a student in your class wore glasses, would you ask them to take it off because all the kids didn't get a pair of glasses to take the test? And our answer is no, we would never ask students to do that. So it's just helping staff, and it's conversation day by day with staff and helping them along that path. The impacted self-perception of students with IEPs, if they're in a different class, they feel that, they understand that, they know that. So helping them be a part of the general ed population and accessing that content was huge. And last but not least, really looking at the legal requirements of the least restrictive environment. We're having conversations as a staff, and it's baby steps. Those of you who said you're in your first year, it really is baby steps, and it's conversations each and every day that help take you down this path. But we're really looking at, they're our students, they're all of our students. They're not these students that go to this class to get this and these go to this. They're all of our students. And how do we work as a team to make sure that they're getting what they need? So that'll take us to our next slide. So what the team decided is they really wanted to try 3 inclusionary practices. The first one, like Matt just said, was starting as co-teaching, but with COVID came apart some challenges, but it was actually a beautiful thing. And it's turned out amazingly well, because we have put all IEP kids equally across all of our classes. And our 3 inclusion specialists now come up behind them and support those teachers and what those kids need to access general education every single day. The other piece is the modified grading. That's taking, well, they'll talk to you in a minute, but they'll allow our IEP students to earn A's and get on those honor rolls. And then the assistive technology piece is gigantic. It's huge. It equals the playing field for our students and allows them to access that content that we keep talking about. So I think we turn it over to the next person now.
So we go into our inclusionary practices, which is the grade recognition. And like Amy and Matt had said prior, we are now doing a modified grading for grade recognition. These students really can achieve the grades that they deserve. A few years ago, when I came into Clovis, I came in midpoint and we were in a resource room and we were pulling 5th, 6th, and 7th graders for reading and math. Sometimes it was all 5th, 6th, and 7th graders doing, half the room was doing math, half the room was doing reading. And we talked at that time, Dustin and I talked about doing a co-taught math class where I would bring in students that had IEPs into his classroom to try the inclusionary practice. And that really proved that some students were feeling like they were separated from other peers. Dustin had asked one of our students, "How are you feeling?" And she really recognized that she didn't like going to the resource room because she felt like she was dumb or could not do it. At that point, we had just adopted a modified rubric from La Pointe School District in Texas. And since then, we have tweaked it to go with our students, our school district, and meet those needs. What the rubric did was it took the level of ability and matched it throughout for certain students so that they could have equity to the grade level content. So we have a little tool right here and it says, you know, do you go to doing accommodations? Is the student able to achieve the grade level content without the accommodations? So then you would go to the no if they were on an IEP and needed accommodations or even modifications to access that grade level content. We really recognized that they weren't getting the grade recognition that they wanted, and we wanted to give them not just a pass fail, which caused many students, or I saw many students, to have low self-esteem and low self-perception of themselves, and they weren't wanting to do the work that was in the resource room or turn it in or try. And we noticed that pulling in by that co-taught math class, that they really felt a part of their peer group. Then the next year we did a little bit more of a modification to our rubric so that it was more on the academic side instead of just the participation side. And we really saw a lot of students flower and come out of their shell, and they were accessing the grade level content. They wanted to do the homework. It was like a light bulb that went off of, oh, I'm able to do this. We had numerous students who commented on that they didn't, like Mrs. Dory said, that they didn't get on honor roll. And we have a student that specifically mentioned, well, I'm doing the best that I can. I do all of my work and I'm in class, and why am I not getting recognition for that? So this year, he actually, being included and not being in pullout, he has done phenomenal and has received all A's across the board in science, history, math, and ELA. So I sent him a little recognition of, Clovis Point, you made honor roll, and he has done above and beyond what he's supposed to do. He is emailing his teachers. He is communicating with his peers in class, which was very difficult for him. We also have another student who always just shrugged his shoulders, wouldn't respond to any answers, said, I can't do it, I can't do it. And then he noticed being in those classrooms and having the support of his peers and interacting with those groups, that he could achieve what he needed to, and that he was understanding. And that really boosted his confidence. And he made those grades to what he needed and deserved. Even using the modified rubric, it just gives them that little added support of, are they able to comprehend? And I like Matt, who often says in our IEP meetings with him and Dustin that he can lift all of these weights. And Dustin and I, we could try and try and try and try, but we might not get there unless we had that accommodation to be able to maintain the strength of our psychologist. So just having that equity for the grade recognition, the students can do it. They are able to access that grade level content and they are able to turn in that work. And if it has to be that they only have every other problem to do, that might just be the amount that their brain is capable of doing, but they're still showing that they're able to access that content.
And I think this picture here, the one with the orange paper on the locker is kind of that tied to that story, because it was right in everybody's face that they weren't getting it, because what they would do, and it was well intended, they would put these things on the students' lockers who made certain grade points, and it would say their grade point and all that. So when that particular student like sees all those on the lockers and there isn't one on his, I don't think we kind of thought of the other side of it is, what about these kids who really are trying hard and they come out and there's those papers on all those lockers, but not on theirs? And, you know, that disheartening feeling, it really, you know, when that kid came forward, it was kind of like looking at each other and saying, this is something we need to fix. This is a systems problem. We've got a kid who is trying their darndest. They're doing everything they need to do. They're working maybe even harder than many of those other students with what they're having to deal with, but yet we're not recognizing that. So this was the fix. And this flow chart, I think the flow chart too, but also the rubric is going to be attached to the website as our artifact. So if anybody's interested in that, you can have access to that. Like she said, it started with a school district in Texas, but we've since done some adjustments to that we felt worked better for our school and our student community.
And I just wanted to play off of that. That particular student also had on his IEP for this goal of 3-paragraph essay, and he just recently submitted a 5-paragraph essay that was fantastic.
All right, so to go kind of off of the modified stuff, one of our big inclusionary practices is the assistive technology. And I can definitely tell in the last 3 years of being at Clovis that this has definitely became a norm in all classrooms, which is so very exciting, because even compared to last year to this year. So just a couple of the things that we kind of put on here. You know, we have the pencil grips and the pencils. The down in the left corner is the to kind of kick your feet, you know, when you want to fidget a little bit, you have your feet on there. Then there's the balance seat. I think they're called wobbly chairs, if that's the correct term for them. I got it off Amazon and I don't really know what it was called. And some fidget spinners and text to speech and stuff like that. But one thing with the assistive technology that I noticed in the co-teaching classroom last year with Brandy, who just spoke, was the co-teacher with me. She really put it into light, and Rebecca Bush, who will talk later, has brought this up too. Brandy said, why can't all of the kids use this stuff in the classroom? Why does it just have to be with our students with IEPs? And I was like, Brandy, you're right. Like, why should it be limited to just these kids? And what I kind of noticed with the multiplication charts and the number lines was, if I just put these on 5 kids in our classroom's desk, all of these people are going to ask, well, why do they get that? And I know that life's not fair and you don't get it and whatever and so on, but why aren't all kids allowed to use a multiplication chart? Why should that be a thing that isn't allowed for all students when teachers can use calculators and multiplication charts whenever they want? So Brandy and I were like, we're going to put these on all of the desks last year. And those kids, those students with IEPs, if they didn't have them on all of them, would not use them because they don't want to be singled out. They already feel that way for different things. And what we noticed were all students were using them. It was this big like aha moment. If we can do this on the desk, then we can let all kids use the balance chair. We can let all kids use the spin bike if they have too much energy or they're feeling a certain way. Why can't other kids have fidget spinners? Or not fidget spinners, fidget toys. And one big thing was setting an expectation and setting the ground rules for these specific things in the classroom. I felt like Brandy did a really good job talking with kids when they got little fidget toys, just setting that ground rule of, hey, you know what? If you're going to use these things, we're going to use them right. And all of us can use them together. One big thing I noticed was that it didn't seem abnormal for anybody to sit in a wobbly chair, or it didn't seem abnormal for the student who can read at a 12th grade reading level to want to listen to an audio. And it wasn't abnormal for kids who could write great papers to do text to speech because they weren't feeling it that day. So it just kind of made this classroom feel very inclusive, and it felt comfortable for all kids. So that was kind of where we were focusing last year. And this year we're seeing it in all gen ed classrooms, and it's normal. And it's not, well, shouldn't only the kids with the IEPs get this? And it's, well, why don't we just allow it? So I know that's one big thing that has changed in the last few years here. And then, just to go off that, in the middle there is a picture with some notes on it. Thank you, Dustin. And that is a new program that we're using this year called Go Formative. I'm not sure if any of the school districts are using this or not. Dawn Carroll, who is one of our math teachers here at Clovis, a 7th grade teacher in my hall, he was on top of it last year. So when we got shut down and we had to go home, here is Don for months going, what are we going to do if we can't come back? And he found this program called Go Formative. And what we've come to realize is that this program is phenomenal for students with IEPs, students with disabilities, and for just our students in general, and for teachers, because it's been a lifesaver for this online. So Go Formative is, I use it for math and science. And so I'm not sure how ELA teachers use it, but we could figure that out together. But I started uploading the notes that we would take in class for all of my students. And what I would do is I would add in audio of me saying the definition of the notes. So if you can look where Dustin's pointing, and normally it would be like, well, this is only for students with IEPs because the other kids should take their notes. Well, other kids don't want to take their notes either. And the point of learning is, yeah, we need to do those things, but if they can listen to it and read it and they're still going to have access to that information, then they're still doing their part in listening, and especially this year. So those notes I upload to everybody in the classroom, but when we take a science test, maybe I just allow the students who have the IEPs to listen to them while they take their tests. And then maybe the other students just get to listen to the audio on the test, because I go through and I, on all the questions of the test, I just reword it in a little bit of a different way that might help them understand the question, especially in math for word problems. You can put in directions. You can add videos into Go Formative. So for instance, today we did adding and subtracting like fractions. And so I included in our Go Formative some extra links to YouTube videos on how to add like fractions, just in case they weren't understanding what I was specifically saying. So this Go Formative has really like changed the way our classroom works, because it's accessible for all students. And I don't like hearing my own voice. And so when I record these articles and I read the articles or the questions, I don't really like listening to it back. So if I mess up in the reading, if it's not terrible, I kind of just leave it in there like if I was in class and I would mess up in class. And so in the beginning of the year, I thought to myself, I'm just going to share this article. Anybody can listen to it if they want. I'm going to share it for all students. And this girl who is at a 12th grade reading level writes in the chat on Google Meets, and she goes, "Hey, Miss Grody, this is going to sound really weird." So your mind as a 7th grade teacher is like, well, okay, here we go. And she goes, "Your voice is really calming. I don't know what it is about it, but I like listening to you talk about plate tectonics." So in my mind, it was like, if I am touching somebody or getting to somebody that's a 12th grade reading level, she can read it on her own, but it's calming to her, then maybe we're doing something right. So that's kind of Go Formative. And that's kind of what we're working with this year. And all gen ed teachers are using it, and they're using the audio on it. And so if you guys ever have any questions, you can about it, or you want to see kind of how I've modified things and done that, then you're more than welcome to send me an email and we can do anything like that. But that's kind of where our school's going, and they're amazing. And so thank you.
And to tag on to what Cassie was saying about the notes, is sometimes we forget what an obstacle notes can be for some students. Like, we kind of assume, well, that's how we learned in college and taking notes is helpful. But if the taking notes becomes the focus and the obstacle, then you've completely lost the content that you're wanting them to take the notes on, because you've just put this huge roadblock in front of them that then they have to wrestle over. So Kesley's idea to put the notes in here and read them just completely remove that obstacle. And then the people that it helps to take the notes, they can do that. The people who that's an obstacle for don't need to. So it really does, it has moved the conversation throughout the staff to like, oh yeah, that's a cool idea. I bet there's students in my class who would find that useful. And it has moved it from these particular students would find this useful to, yeah, I bet there's people who would gravitate toward that and would appreciate that.
And it really helps us keep, what is the goal of the learning? Is the goal that they can take the notes, or is the goal that they actually learn the content? I think it's really helped us keep that focus.
So kind of along the lines of what Matt was talking about with our journey from the resource room that was a small like school within a school to what we're doing now, it has really allowed us to do what I feel special ed should be all about, and that's meeting the needs of individuals. So, with the graphics here, we've got the model where the student stands out and they feel kind of different and isolated. And what we're moving to now is everybody's got their own little differences and they're all in together. So to kind of put a positive spin on a negative thing, COVID has kind of helped kickstart that a little bit, because when we moved from the co-teach to say, okay, now these students are going to be spread out, we're going to mix the population completely, and we're going to work on supporting that inclusion, it really did kind of boost us ahead, I think, of where we would have been if we had kind of been taking our smaller baby steps. Prior, we had kind of made the mistake of letting the schedule dictate where students learned and what kind of services they received. And now we're able to kind of flip that around and say, they're all going to be out in classrooms, and we're going to, on a case-by-case basis, look at students and say, do they need increased support? Is this enough? What can I do to help the teacher? And I kind of have to acknowledge Toppenish. I don't remember the name of the school. Is it middle school? Toppenish has a site that's also on the Herring Center, and they have this model of inclusion specialists. And when we saw that, we kind of said, yeah, that's what we need to do. So kind of like the whole idea of this sharing what we're doing and what works and what doesn't. We didn't have everything figured out, but when we see a good idea, we say, hey, let's take that and adjust it, kind of like we did the grading rubric. And so we moved to this idea of being inclusion specialists, and instead of having, this group of students is registered to me this period and they're in this room receiving special ed instruction, we were kind of freed from that to say, okay, what students do you need to actually work with in one-on-one or small groups? And what can you do to help the other students thrive in that normal classroom environment? So it's a very different perspective. But one of the comments at the beginning, somebody was talking about like how to get it right or what moves to make. And I like that our administration, when we first started this journey, said straight out, this isn't going to be perfect, but we know that what we're doing right now isn't the best thing. So let's move towards the best thing. And a big key, I think, to what we did was just being willing to do something and then adjust as you go and say, that worked, but this part isn't great. Or wait a minute, let's pause this idea because here's this big negative side effect that we hadn't foreseen. And, just that flexibility to try something and know that it's not going to be A+ the day it rolls out, that you're going to have adjustments that need to be made. So Brandy alluded to this story of this girl that was in her 5th grade class. So we had a situation where our resource room teacher had left and it was mid-year, and Brandy was hired on, and we're very, very happy to have her. And in that kind of chaos of what was having to happen, where she had some students trying to do math and some trying to do ELA, and there was way too many scheduled into that room at the same time, we talked about it, said, why don't you bring your math kids into our co-taught class? So yeah, it'll be an even bigger group. It was already a little too large, but there'll be more of us, and at least they're in a more gen ed appearing room. And so we had been doing that, I don't know, a week and a half or 2 weeks. And it was that into class where, people are kind of packing up, put their chairs on the desks and all that kind of thing. And this little gal was kind of standing near the back, leaning against the counter. So I came up to her, and it was just really trying to make a connection. I wasn't trying to do some big inclusive research or anything. And I just asked her, because I was curious, like, so what do you like better? Did you like it where there was the smaller group in the room that you used to be, or do you like this kind of class where we do this? And, I said, you're not going to hurt my feelings either way. I'm just curious. And she said, I like this. I mean, she didn't even hesitate. She said, I like this better because it makes me feel like a real kid. So that statement was huge, because here's this student basically telling you what we were doing made them feel less than. It made them feel not included. So this self-perception of when we put students in with everybody else, it raises their own expectations of themselves, but it also makes them realize that they're like these guys. They're pulling the rope with everybody else, and not everything is easy for other people. I think sometimes they get the impression that everything's hard for me and it's easy for everybody else. So when we get to put them in with their peers, disabled or not, they can see that, hey, there's some things come easy to some people some of the time, and other things are difficult for those same people some of the time. And that's just part of learning. By isolating them, we were giving them a distorted perspective of what learning feels like. And it just felt morally wrong. It was a tragedy. So what we found is, like I was saying, the expectations and the self-perception improved. It changed students' outlook when they walk into the room and they see that they know who the students are that don't do well in school. And they look around and they say, okay, there's less students than normal. And I know that kid, and I know that kid. That kid's always getting in trouble. They kind of create this idea of, oh, I'm in that class. I'm that kind of kid. So creating that situation where they walk into a classroom and look around and go, oh, I know her. She's in the band. And I know that kid. He's the honor roll and he's the ASB secretary, then they realize, hey, I'm part of the school. I'm with all these kids that I see out and about. I'm not in some special situation because there's something wrong with me. When, like what Kessie was talking about with the assistive tech, as a staff now, we're talking differently about students with special needs. We're talking differently about accommodations, modifications. We're talking differently about the way we teach. That the whole staff is looking at, okay, I have this student and this student who need this and this, but then they look around at their roster, the faces on their screen, and realize like, oh, and there's 7 or 8 others who would also benefit from this. So it becomes less about labels and identified students and looking at what's going to help students. And so that goes into the last one, that assistive technology isn't just meeting the needs of certain people who have it written on a piece of paper that they have this need, that there's students who have all sorts of needs and some of them just aren't identified. A couple of years ago, I was teaching a 6th grade class and top student in the school, straight A's, sports, just absolute model student. I would look up in the middle of class and he's in the back of the room, like miming like he's pitching a ball because he was real into baseball. He was standing in the back of the room, basically like the air guitar of baseball. And so I'm like, I'm good with that. This kid needs to move. He's rocking everything, getting straight A's. I'm not going to touch that. He knows what his need is. He needs to move and it's working for him. So that idea of it's not just your struggling students who have these needs, especially with those assistive technology or the fidgets or the bikes, it's everybody. Everybody has those little things that make them unique individuals.
All right. So my name is Renelle Davis. I've been teaching at Clovis since we opened 14 years ago, and I teach general ed. So I kind of wanted to just bring the perspective of how does this all fit in for a general ed teacher, because most of our team is teachers that really specialize in students with IEPs. So what had happened in the past, ever since Clovis opened, is in my science class, for example, I would have all the students in. They would all be mixed together. And what was common practice is that students that had IEPs would get a grade of pass or a grade of fail. We felt like at the time as teachers that was a fair and comparable way to give grades. And we've just always done it that way. We didn't realize that there was anything we were doing that was wrong, or we just thought we were doing what we needed to do. And it wasn't until we heard that student making the comment of, well, how come I'm not on honor roll? Because when you give students pass fail, it doesn't count towards their GPA. The P doesn't count for any points. So that was a big aha to us. And once we realized that this student had this self-perception where things weren't fair, it sort of gave us the motivation to want to change. So luckily the team did a bunch of research, our special ed teachers, our vice principal, and they found a great resource from another school district. And they brought it to a staff meeting and they shared it with everybody on the staff. And they kind of shared the story of why we want to do this. It was a big aha moment for general ed teachers, because I don't think until it was brought to our attention that this is not fair, that we really realized there was a need to change. So the why for us was super important. And it was a huge conversation that we had that day in the staff meeting. Everybody kind of remembers it. It was just sort of eye-opening. We were presented with not just one, but 2 different rubrics. One of the rubrics is a rubric that we use more for students that are fairly close to being at grade level. They just need a little bit of maybe a few modifications or a few accommodations. They're really close. And so that rubric really deals with the content and for them to be able to show us what they know, just maybe in a little bit different way. Another rubric that we have really shows us students that are, they're performing their very best that they can, but maybe the at grade level material just isn't accessible to them. For those students, we have a different rubric, and both of the rubrics are in the end in the artifacts. So we rolled this out, and really we had our flow chart that we could use as general ed teachers to try to determine which rubric would be appropriate for each student. Go ahead and click on to the next slide. So what we found out is after the rubrics were rolled out to staff, a little bit after that, the vice principal sent out a survey to staff wanting to know how things were going. And so when we first got the survey, everybody filled it out. And we can see that before we had these grading rubrics, it was not very common at all that teachers were going to use any common planning tool. We just had relied on using pass fail and didn't really have a second thought about it. But once the grading rubrics were introduced and people had a tool, it was really clear in this data here that people actually were using the grading rubrics. It changed how we were grading students in our classroom. It changed our teaching practice. We also took some of this data later, and the team kind of looked at it and looked at the percentage of students that said, no, they're not using the grading rubrics. And so we started asking the questions of why. And we've actually found that there were some issues with the way that the rubrics were set up. And so it's constantly being evolved. We have better ideas where we're like, oh yeah, let's change this and let's make this better. And this works for this student. And so it's an evolution, and it's a process that's happening, but we just kind of jumped in and tried it and have that tool now to use with our students.
Hi, my name is Carrie Stewart, and this is my second year at Clovis, and I'm the 5th grade inclusion specialist. And developing our multi-year vision and plan. So next year we will be moving to a K through 6. So the focus will be to welcome new staff and to build a unified culture within one building. So our new staff is going to have to come on and understand what our inclusion culture is all about, and we'll talk to them about it and get them all riled up about it. We're going to create an inclusive environment with a spectrum of services, not siloed programs. All students are not just physically placed in a gen ed classes, but truly belong and feel a part of the classroom community. Special ed is a service, not a placement, and we have to reiterate that. And gather student and teacher feedback by observing and surveying. All right. So laying the groundwork. So PBIS was adopted district-wide. Systems were solidly in place in our building on year 1. That included giving Coyote Cash. And Coyote Cash, every teacher got a stack of fake cash, and every time they saw positive behavior, they got to dole out the cash. And on Friday, the students were able to spend that cash. And once a month, they had an activity hour that they got to pay into to be a part of. And we also had the check-in, check-out system. And we had Swiss behavior tracking and data collection. And all this was run by a non-special ed teacher, we had a PBIS coordinator. Then we also had RTI, was part of the schedule 4 days a week, starting at the beginning of our journey. SEL was being taught in small groups 1 day a week using district-wide adopted curriculum starting in year 1. And then we also have parent and community involvement. We have the Coyote Closet, which is a kind of a little stash of clothes and school supplies. And if we see a lot of them are donated by our community. And if we see a kid come to school without a coat, and we get in the middle of winter and 10 inches of snow, and they say they don't have one, get parent permission, and we can give them a coat from our Coyote Closet. We also have the Parent Square app, which is new to us this year. I don't know, several of you might have used apps like Remind or Blooms or Class Dojo for communication with parents. Well, Parent Square is like that, only a lot more. It's district-wide, and we can communicate with parents individually and students, as a class of students. Our superintendent sends messages, and so that's a way for us to communicate with our community and our parents, and it goes vice versa, and it also translates automatically to whatever language the parents speak. We also post on Facebook and have web pages. And we have bilingual nights for our bilingual community, since about 50% of our students are bilingual students. And our district has adopted the MTSS model that we fully implement here at Clovis Point. And MTSS is a multi-tiered system of multi-tiered system of supports. And what that is all of those things that I just listed previously are under the umbrella of multi-tiered system of supports. So we look at the whole child when somebody asks us about a child. So if traditionally, if somebody came to us with a question about a child academically, we look at their academics and they go through the RTI system. Or behaviorally, we look at PBIS and we do PBIS. Now, if a child is brought to our attention, we look at everything. We look at PBIS, RTI, SEL, and we communicate with the parents. And if then we make sure that we cover all of the bases about that child, we look at the whole child. So we are covering and seeing if anything affects the other for the learning of this child. And that's what the MTSS model does, is they bring all of those things together to help the child. And it's got tiers, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3.
Like they say, Maslow's before Bloom's, right?
That's right.
Thank you, Carrie. So all of that kind of everything we've talked about this far is really going into our high leverage moves in our school. One big thing is we moved to that co-teaching model. It's still evolving with our pandemic. Things have changed, but I'm going to touch on my story with co-teaching in just a minute. We added an extra special education teacher to our staff. We provided the rubrics we've talked about to create equity in our grading in all classrooms. We've purchased that adaptive technology, things like GoFormative and Talk to Speech. And then we've provided teachers with professional development to universal design of learning, which if you have not taken a universal design of learning course or class, I do highly recommend it. It was phenomenal this summer. But part of that high leverage move, and that kind of goes with my why or my story or what brought me here today, was this co-teaching model that our school moved into last year. When it first got brought up, Erin Coyle, who was our vice principal last year, we were talking and she said, would you want to co-teach next year? And you know, when your boss talks to you, you're like, yeah, okay. So I'm thinking about it and I'm like, well, what would this be? And then the next day I'm in Erin's room and I am crying and I'm saying, Erin, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I would be good at co-teaching. I'm scared. I'm nervous. That self-doubt that students have, we have it too in teaching. So I had this self-doubt in my head, and it wasn't because I was scared of ever working with students with IEPs. That's my favorite thing in the world, but it was more of, will I be good enough at this? Will I be able to be successful with students on IEPs and students who are not? Am I going to be able to do this? And yes, you have a co-teacher, but at that time, I didn't know who it was. And I'm thinking to myself, well, I'm newer at this. What if they know more than me? What if I just seem like, I'm not great and all this stuff. So you just have this self-doubt. And Erin kept reassuring me, just think about it. You're going way over this. You don't need to. Amalia, who is, she's not on here today, but she was a co-teacher that Brandy, who is here, went between our two classrooms as our co-teacher. And Amalia, I call my work mom, and she sat down with me and she goes, Kesley, this is not any different than what you already do in your classroom now. The only difference is you are going to have another adult who is going to help you and who is educated in making you better at this. So that was kind of where my tears turned into, okay, why wouldn't I do this? I always have this, I want to learn and I want to be better thing in me. And so I thought to myself, if this is going to make me a better teacher, then I need to do it. A few years ago, I was lucky enough to long-term sub for Amy Dory, our principal now, at the junior high. And I kind of was put into a class that was partly co-taught with one of the 8th and 9th grade science teachers. And if it weren't for that confidence that I had from Amy always being there and walking me through the stresses of it, and then Susan Dretke, who was the science teacher I actually co-taught with, I don't think I would have been as apt to want to do it. But Susan Dretke set this bar for what is it like to co-teach and what should it be like. And so when I had that moment of that's what it should be, I hopped on board. I got lucky because I got to work with Brandy White, who is in here. And if I call her Miss Davison, I'm sorry, she got married. So Brandy and I met this summer, and instantly it was like this connection of this is what we want for our classroom. We want everyone to learn. With anything, the co-teaching had its ups and it had its downs. It had its win moments and it had its losses for sure. But what I learned from this co-teaching, what I learned was that you can always learn. You can always be a better teacher. It doesn't matter how many years you have in it, I didn't have a lot of years, so this is kind of setting that bar for this. But Brandy and I started seeing confidence level of kids go up. So students who were on IEPs, there's one specific kid who would shut off. He wouldn't talk in groups. He never wanted to be in groups. He would always say, I don't know, and kind of cover his face. And by the end of the year, he was asking to work in groups with other kids. He was participating. He was doing the work. He wasn't covering his face. And it was one of those moments where you're like, oh my gosh, like, who cares if he can't do this specific grade level math? He's right there. He's almost there, but he's showing his face. He's working in a group, which he has never done before, and he likes it. And that was like that aha moment. We had another kid who was behavior half days. He didn't like coming to school. He only came in the afternoon, and he started coming every day. It might have been half days, but he was there and he was doing the work and he was raising his hand and he would always have them right. And he would tell other kids, it wasn't a matter of it, if they're smart, it was a matter of him sharing his ways of learning. And he would do that. And he shared it with his class, and he ended up becoming a TA for my science class for a little bit, and for Christy Barnes, who is a 5th grade teacher. So this student would go down, and he's tall. He's like 6 foot and in 7th grade. And he would go down and help those 5th grade students, and he would love it. And he hated science, but I asked if he would be my TA. So he came in a few days a week. And our theory was he might not be doing the work, but he's listening. So we still had him there. We had another kid who barely spoke and covered his mouth, and he was very quiet, but he was sneaky. He would always make other kids laugh, and we didn't know. One day he might have yelled at Brandy as I walked through the door because he was mad that he didn't do something. And it was like one of those moments where we're like, yeah, you got to go to the office because you can't say that in class, but he just yelled. Like, where did that come from? Like, you never speak like that. And so in his IEP meeting, when we talked with him, we're like, we like to hear you talk. Before the shutdown, he was talking at a normal voice level to us. He was asking us how we were. And then just kind of to go off of that, we had another student who always stopped by my desk. He always wanted to. And he used to go, I can't do this. He'd throw his pencil. I don't want to do it. I can't do it. Kind of that attitude of, I know people are looking at me and I know I struggle. And it turned into, I'll share my answer and I don't even care if I have it wrong, but I know that that's a good thing to do and my teacher will be really happy. So he started sharing answers and you just see all of this growth. And then you have this moment where you print off their, you know, their testing, their STAR tests to see where they're at. And every single one of these students with IEPs grew 1 grade level, 2 grade level, 3 grade levels. And I would go into Aaron's office and it makes me tear up because it was that moment when Aaron was crying in the office with me. And I'm like, I think I'm doing what you asked me to do. And then Aaron said, Kesley, I think you found your why. And it was just kind of that moment where I had somebody believe that I could do something. And I took pride in it. And I had Brandy, who I couldn't have done it without her. And she's here and she can chime in. But and everybody else, there's more than just these people involved. But it was like that moment where we did something really powerful. And when we got shut down, I had a really hard time because we weren't able to continue doing that. And so I just hope that those continue to go with those kids. But yeah, I just think if you have the opportunity to take a chance, just know that you're somebody like me who cried and had self-doubt and at times didn't think it was working or at times didn't know, and then the outcome is just unbelievable. So if you have a chance and your administrator is believing in you or your school, take it, because the confidence that I saw, not just with students with IEPs, but everyone in the classroom just grew and everybody worked together. And it's just a cool story. And I'm just happy to be here and happy to talk about it. So thank you. I will stop crying now for you.
I think too that Kesley's story kind of shows that sometimes we forget that teachers need to feel safe in their own classroom. And if the school community can take on this thing of, okay, the special education teacher, this inclusion specialist in my room isn't here to judge me, they're here to join me, then her feeling safe sounds like it made students feel safe, but she had to feel safe first. So I think that was pretty cool. And I think that has spread. I think there was a hesitancy. And I think after hearing people's experience in the school started talking about it, more people feel safe to say, yeah, I wouldn't mind somebody coming in and helping with these kids. And
I think more and more teachers are asking for help. I mean, the 3 of inclusion specialists and I met at the beginning of the year, and I said, give them time, give them time, give them time. And am I right, guys? Now they're begging for it, and they're building. They'll show you, but they're building folders and resources for all teachers to use all the time, and they're eating it up. They're loving it.
And I just wanted to touch base off of Kesley's whole speech. It was fabulous for us to get together and actually build that relationship too. And at the very beginning of last year, what we did is we brought in kidney tables and put them in a room with the concept and idea that we would pull those small groups with our students that needed more help, or the students that were on IEPs. And we ended up not even using those tables in both the co-teaching classes. We made it to where we pulled small group, but it was always blended. It was always different students at different times, different days. It just depended on the skill that they needed to use. And I think that that really helped all of our kids see that it's fluid and always moving, and everyone needs assistance with different concepts.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Bush, and I'm a 6th grade ELA and history teacher, and this is my 4th year teaching at Clovis. And then I'm just going to talk about how the building as a whole has kind of taken on the different changes that have come with all these different inclusionary practices. So the first thing that 5th and 6th grade teachers did last year was we took on the challenge of coming up with essential standards for our different content areas, which was a pretty hefty task. As you guys know, there are a ton of Common Core core standards. And so narrowing it down to what was essential was pretty tough, but we took on that task and narrowed it down. 7th grade was not included in that only because they are leaving next year to the junior high. So we're sticking with the 5th and 6th grade teams that are going to be here as we transition into a K-6 school. So this really helps streamline our process too for things like RTI and special education referrals, guidance team referrals, because we have something to look at specifically, those standards, how they're being met or how they're not being met, in what ways. So it really helps streamline those things for us. And even though we're online this year, it's still something really, really helpful to look to and to go back on and to pinpoint to help us decide if kids are meeting the standards or not. The next thing we did is made sure we have common planning time. So before COVID, we met Monday mornings, and then we had 4 vertical meetings where every grade level in a content area met on a Monday morning to talk about things. But now, because of COVID, we're actually able to meet every day on our prep times, which has been awesome for exchanging a lot of ideas. A lot of teachers already do a ton of inclusionary practices without the prompting that was given through our inclusionary teams. They just didn't know that they were using it that way. So it was kind of nice to be able to have us meeting all the time now and sharing those different things that we already do with one another. And so we're not recreating the wheel all the time, because somebody somewhere has probably already done that, which is awesome. The next thing is the SPED teachers schedule now really supports us as gen ed teachers, because they're able to help with our kids that are in our class all the time now. They're not being pulled out of our classes like they were. When I first started, I only saw some of my students with IEPs for history. I didn't even get them for ELA. So now I have those kids all the time, and the SPED teachers are really able to help support us. And they have all the different modified assignments that they've been creating for us, modified rubrics, which is super helpful for writing, that they've been creating and keeping in a folder for us where we're all able to access it. And then the last thing is adequate number of staff members. We were able to hire a 3rd special education teacher this year. So our special education teachers are now specific for grade level or content area. So if we need something, we have somebody to go to who specializes in that specific area, which is super helpful, because you're getting the person who's an expert in that area, who's the case manager for that student. And then that student has somebody looking specifically at them for whatever reason, whether it's like help in ELA or help in math, help at a 6th grade level, whatever it is. So that was super helpful as well.
Okay, so it my slide kind of goes along exactly with what Rebecca was saying. One of the things that we've learned along the way is that a lot of times the general ed teachers, myself included, we did what we did because we didn't know another way. And now we have moved from having kids pulled out into the resource room and 2 different things happening to where all of the kids are together in the same classroom. And our special ed teachers are now inclusionary specialists. So we're learning that if you give general ed teachers like myself the tools, number one, we appreciate having those tools because we didn't know about them. We're not really the experts in the field of making modifications and accommodations. So having our SPED staff help us with that. Number 2, our equity is increasing, and that's been a lot of conversation in our building as well. Before we had equity or equality, all of the students were kind of treated the same, which wasn't fair. We're really moving towards equity. What do different students need in order to help them get to where they need to be? Because not all of the students are the same, but they should be paired up together. So the surveys that are shared here are kind of showing you how staff responded to these 2 questions. Do you appreciate having the tools? And do you feel like they've given you equity to help your students have equity in the classroom? And once we saw the data from this, then the vice principal, Erin, and the special ed team kind of talked with some of the staff and said, hey, how can we improve? How can we make it even better? And so now we have this huge database of tools that we can use for our special ed students that are in the general ed classroom, so that we can be sure that each kid has what they need to learn what they need to learn. We have equity for them.
one of the things that came up in my mind when I looked at the second graph was like, how would you think that somebody would strongly disagree that the modifying grading rubric helped them provide equity? But that was one of the things I think that Renelle was referring to when we saw, okay, this could use some help, is the rubric as it came to us, as we borrowed it, made it impossible for a student on modified grading to fail. And when you look at a student and say, well, they're refusing everything, they're not using the help that's given and so on, that really wasn't equity to have it impossible for them to fail. So, you know, tweaking that, I think that conversation has helped. And we've since adapted that and improved it to fit our need. And I think that this graph would look even more blue and red if we were to give that again today.
And our takeaways, our model has evolved and continues to evolve to become more and more inclusive. Understanding and seeing the perspective of education through the comments of our students has been very eye-opening and reflective of our practice. There isn't a right way to be inclusive. Rather, there should be a continuum of services so that we can be responsive to each individual situation. And I thought it was interesting. I found this modification of Maslow's hierarchy of school needs. And a lot of what we talked about today is in the belonging, a sense of belonging and the sense of self-esteem and how they need that to be able to learn. And next, I want to introduce Christy Barnes, our 5th grade teacher, and have her tell you her experience as a child and how it relates to our story at Clovis.
All right, first of all, I'm really honored to work with this team at Clovis. It has been a journey and we're still in the infancy of the journey, but it has been very rewarding for me. And I've seen I've seen a lot of good things because of this direction that we're going. So yeah, I'd like to take the opportunity to be vulnerable and transparent by sharing my story. I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and the photo that you see there is about 5 years old in kindergarten. I mean, I was happy, carefree, silly, curious, talkative. I was innocent, and I thought of myself as just an ordinary kid with no differences. And I believe that I was just like any other kid, and it didn't start until kindergarten where, because of a communication disorder, I had to not be able to go to kindergarten with my regular peers, and I had to take the bus to a town that was like 20 miles up the road to go get services. And it started there, and it didn't really stop until the 6th grade. I was pulled out for not being able to read. I was labeled hyperactive. I had too much energy for teachers to control. I was labeled as defiant because I couldn't figure out how to control my behavior. And I started to really doubt who I was. And one of the colleagues just now said something like, safe in your own skin. I didn't really feel safe in my own skin. So anyway, I started to identify myself as not what I could do, but everything that I couldn't do. I wasn't able to sit still. I wasn't able to read or write, like, keep up with my peers. So obviously, I was the same little kid in that picture, but I didn't really have much to smile about. My smiles turned to frowns and my laughter turned to tears. And I was just lost. Like, my self-identity was just lost and distorted. Can you show the other slide, please? I really wanted to feel, I knew I felt different, and I was really alone and just wanting to fit in. And so it manifests in different ways. You have behaviors that manifest, and they come out because of, you know, the experiences that you're having. And so anger just took over, and I was just really angry, and nobody could really figure out what was going on. I couldn't, my mom couldn't. So, you know, then came, you know, visits to the counselor, you know, trying to figure out what was going on. And I really truly believe now that I am an educator myself, and looking back, is I really feel that being separate and saw and seen as different, my teachers probably didn't intend to, like, I'm going to put Christy, you know, out of the classroom and I hope she feels different. That's not what happened. I mean, I had good teachers, but how else can a student interpret what is, you know, how can they interpret that? There's really no other outcome. You're going to feel different because you're being pulled out, and all your other classmates are staying and learning while you're trying to be, you know, taught the basic skills. And that's, you, as a student, as you get older, you just put those puzzle pieces together. And you know, 6th grade was a hard year, but it was probably the best year. And I really believe that teachers are put on this earth for a reason. And, you know, it was the year, you know, puberty hit, so that fueled the fire. And, you know, I had suicidal thoughts because I just couldn't figure out who I was and what I was doing, and nobody else could. And I had one teacher who saw that, you know, Christy, you've got a lot of energy, and we need to figure out a way for you to put this energy to good use. Would you like to maybe try out for sports? And that was it. That was the day, the moment that changed the trajectory of my life, because I wouldn't probably be here right now if it wasn't for that teacher. Seeing that in me, like, and that's what we're doing here at Clovis. We are changing the trajectory of where we were going on a whole different journey, and it's affecting kids' lives. And I am just really glad to be a part of it. And as far as how has this experience changed my theory of teaching, my belief in teaching is it's the best for kids. We have the research that shows it. We have education. We have educated teachers that know it. We have tools to do it. So why not? I mean, why not do it? Why not do what's best for kids? And so that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Thank you, Christy. Thank you for everyone for sharing their stories today. I'm honored to work with this team of educators who really do come every single day. And we are building a continuum of services for kids based on their need. And that's the coolest part of the work that we're doing. I know I'm new to this, and I thanked Erin earlier today. She started this path, but I get the opportunity to continue it. And I'm extremely excited. I think as we move into a K-6, we get to build this elementary school from the ground up. We get to set the expectations with our staff early, and we get to become an inclusive building. And those that want to join and be a part of that will flock to us for that. With that, we're going to continue the professional development of UDL, assistive technology and PLC work, of course. We're going to really work on the collaboration piece, building trust, like Kesley talked about, with each other and being vulnerable, but being okay to be in each other's classrooms and help each other out. And really look at all of our students being our students. And that's really going to be our focus moving forward. We'll use feedback and surveys, asking our staff, our parents, lots of great questions. We're going to continue building data both with SEL and academics, and fine tune those supports. Because as we talked about, we really started building a continuum this year. and put all kids first in gen ed classrooms. And then based on their need and what we see with the teachers and the students, we're building that continuum. So we're going to continue that work. We're still in the very beginning stages of that. And then of course, continue to build and refine our MTSS process as we do that. And we can't wait. Like I said, we get to build this from the bottom up, and the staff's going to stand together, and we're going to move forward as a team.
A minute ago, you saw the resources page, and that will be available up on our website. Along with the recording of this presentation will also be those artifacts around some of the items that Clovis Point shared with you today. So, I mean, obviously, a tremendous thank you to Clovis Point for sharing their journey today. So let's do a quick share in the chat. What are some of the systems, culture, or leadership practices you heard about today that support inclusive schools? Or what's just something that really resonated with you? What's something that you said, what you heard about today that you think about, hey, I'm going to take that back and try to apply that in my school? Or what were some stories that really connected with you? Please take a minute and add that into the chat. I know it takes a minute for some of these to come in, so let's come back and visit. We heard a lot about assistive technology today. Thank you, Rebecca. For all students, not just students with IEPs, use assistive tech accommodations for all students. That's great. That was definitely a clear message. Keep those coming in the chat and we'll revisit. It gives us good feedback and allows us to follow up with you about some of those high leverage moves that you might make in your school. So please feel free to reach out to us at the Herring Center if you'd like for us to connect you with any of the educators from Clovis Point. And to learn more about the Demonstration Sites Project and OSPI's Inclusionary Practices Professional Development Project, please visit these websites or feel free to email us at uwdemosites@uw.edu. Also visit our website. We'll be posting recordings of this webinar along with a folder with the resources and artifacts presented today. While you're on our website, we also encourage you to sign up for some of our virtual visits. Our first cohort of demonstration sites are hosting virtual visits that allows for schools to have a more personalized visit based on their inclusionary practices needs. So I'm going to hand it over to my partner, Rena Marie Leon Guerrero, who's going to walk us through a really fun, quick collaborative activity before we talk about clock hours and send you on your way.
Yes, well, thank you again, Clovis Point. That was amazing. I'd like to invite everybody to help create a word cloud with us. So you can text, I'll also put a link to this poll in the chat box, but in one word, what are the systems, culture, and our leadership practices you heard about today that support inclusive schools? You can text UW Herring Center to 22333 to join the poll, or in a separate browser, you can go to pollev.com/UW Herring Center. Okay. Vulnerability, yes. Inspirational. You can also put your responses in the chat box as well. Support. Collaboration. Awesome. Collaboration, yes, and as if there's repetition in words, those words will get larger.
Great. Thank you, Rita Marie.
Right.
Keep adding those in, and we'll be able to
Yes.
share that with Clovis Point.
Right. Yes, the poll is going to stay open. Yes, so please keep adding on.
So also, we'd love to get feedback about our session today. This will give us the information we can use effectively to share demo sites journeys in webinar format in the future. Please click this link and fill out a brief survey through Google Forms. I think Molly's gonna be sending on some stuff too. The survey is anonymous. Molly will send clock hour forms to those of you who are in attendance after the webinar. If she hasn't already, she's always very on top of it. Thank you to OSPI and CSTEP for their partnership with this project. And again, a tremendous, tremendous thank you to Clovis Point for your inspiring work. It takes a lot of courage to put yourself out there and to share those earlier stages of your journey. And we just can't tell you how much we appreciate it and what a joy it's been to partner with all of you. So thanks to all of you for joining us today, all our attendees, to learn more about inclusionary practices and for envisioning how you might take some of what you learned today and apply it back in your own schools. We hope you'll join us for future webinars and that when our doors open again, you'll take advantage in person of visiting our Washington State demonstration site schools.